Call to order a regular meeting for the Normal Town Council for Monday, December 2nd, 2019. Please call the roll.
Mayor Coos?
Here.
Mr. McCarthy?
Here.
Mrs. Cummings?
Here.
Mr. Nord?
Here.
Ms. Smith?
Here.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Here.
Mr. Preston?
Here.
We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have no public comment tonight, so we go to the omnibus agenda items considered routine, and will be taken with one vote unless a council member would like to pull an item for discussion. Ms. Smith?
Jay.
Thank you. Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Items considered for the omnibus agenda tonight are approval of the minutes of the work session of November 18th, 2019, and approval of minutes of the regular council meeting of November 18th, 2019. A report to receive and file Town of Normal expenditures for payment as of November 7th, 2019. A motion to approve the year 2020 town meeting calendar. A resolution requesting permission to close a portion of U.S. Highway 51 for the annual J.C.'s parade, Christmas parade. A resolution authorizing the execution of an intergovernmental agreement with McLean County for centralized booking services. A resolution authorizing the execution of an intergovernmental agreement for the police shooting range facility, and that's with the City of Bloomington. A resolution authorizing the execution of an intergovernmental agreement with the City of Bloomington, McLean County, and Ecology Action Center for solid waste management services. And a resolution reapproving the final plat of the re-subdivision of outlots 502 and 503 in the Constitution Trail Center subdivision having to do with the H2 Hotel project. Please call the roll.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mayor Coos?
Aye. The omnibus is approved with the exception of I and J. I is a resolution amending a reciprocal easement agreement for the Hyatt Place Hotel. Mr. Nord?
I so move. Second.
Yep. Mr. Nord?
A question on this. Is there a policy that helps guide us in the event that someone builds outside of an easement?
A policy, generally, I suppose it depends on what the issue is. If it's a home that's built over an easement, I don't know, we probably would address that legally. If in this particular instance, a sign was built outside the easement, we could take a legal position of requiring them to move the sign. But relocating the sign about 5 feet, amending the easement would have very little public impact. So we think the best approach is just to amend the easement.
Sure. What was it, 2 months ago? We had another easement question where the sewer was outside of an easement. And that's why I'm just asking, is there a policy? Because this is the second time something has come up.
Correct. The previous incident that you're referring to, if I recall correctly, I might have to check with Ryan, but we actually thought it was in the public best interest to relocate the sewer anyway, to get it into the right-of-way and allow the property owner then to develop the land.
I think the issue is that there are so many variables on these issues that it's hard to develop a firm policy for it, because what would be the parameters of such policy, because every issue is different, and what caused that correction of an easement is almost never the same thing. So it'd be pretty difficult to have an overarching policy, I think.
Mrs. Smith. Ms. Smith.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Smith.
So in my correspondence with you on this matter earlier in the day, you were indicating it is 5 feet outside the easement, and this and if we weren't to grant it, it would still be within their landscaping bed. So that's why it's not considered material to concern ourselves with granting this easement, and it came to attention because of the change of ownership, correct?
That is correct.
And so once we take this action, there's no further issue, even if it changes ownership again?
Correct, the easement would be accurate. The only time it could be an issue is if the sign was damaged and they built a new sign and it was in the wrong location. But hopefully that never happens, and if council approves this easement tonight, the sign will be legally located in the accurate easement.
Okay, thank you.
Further on the item? Please call the roll.
Ms. Cummings? Aye. Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The resolution is approved. Item J is an ordinance modifying Chapter 25, Division 16, Plan Review, Building, HVAC, Electric, Sign, and Plumbing Permit Fees associated with the implementation of the Central Square Track-It software system.
I so move.
Second. Ms. Smith?
I had been in discussion with Ms. Reese about this specific item, and what's included in the packet is the new fee schedule, and the statement is made that there's no significant financial impact anticipated, but I would really like to see the change, the before and after picture, and I believe you have that available so that I can see it on there and then compare that to what's in the packet?
Yes, I think Mr. Trummel's going to take a quick look and pull that up. It is a little bit convoluted. The code as it exists today is difficult to follow, which makes the fee schedule a little bit of a conundrum.
It's not coming, there it is, thank you.
So, Greg, could you walk
Sure,
us through that, please?
I'll do my best. So, and thank you, Ms. Smith. This is a little convoluted, and our apologies. I meant to include this language in the original packet, so I apologize for that. So big picture, what we're asking to do here tonight is to consolidate what are currently 4 different fee schedules, as Ms. Reese mentioned, for heating, electric, plumbing, and sign permitting processes. Each one of them right now uses a different fee schedule to establish the permit fee amount. And so as part of the Central Square and implementation in this new software we've gone to effective back in early October, we saw it as an opportunity to try and consolidate the fee schedules into one simpler fee schedule that would make it easier certainly for contractors or homeowners or other developers that are using this, along with our ability to actually use software, and this, we're in the early stages, but use software via online, so people can apply for permits and determine what their fees will be online, as opposed to having to make a visit directly to the office. So what we're suggesting, and again, I can briefly explain for each fee schedule. For example, electric fees right now are determined, the permit fee is determined on the amperage size. So if it's a new building and it's got a 400 amp service on it, the fee schedule basically says 400 amp service in a new building is X amount of dollars. We still collect a dollar amount for the installation and the project cost, just to track that information, but that's not what the fee is determined on. And so what this would suggest is basically saying if the electrical installation is going to be $20,000, you plug the $20,000 into a fee schedule and here is your permit fee. As opposed to, is it a new, is it remodeled, is it a certain size amperage? Then it gets more complicated where if it's say for example, like a multi-tenant commercial building or an apartment building, you might have a house meter, like a power meter, and then also like 10 different sub-meters. Then there are fees for each individual meter that go with it. So now you're collecting the amperage of the building, the number of meters, and then, depending on certain circumstances, could be, if it's a large commercial project, there is a multiplier for actual just hard cost construction. And then those 3 criteria get added together to determine a fee. I'm not saying that's efficient or customer friendly, it's just been that way for a long time. So that's electric. Plumbing is a little different in that the permit fees are calculated on the number of fixtures that are involved in a plumbing project. So if you have a large apartment building, like for example, a Kensington Suites, 32-unit apartment building, 4 bathrooms per unit, a kitchen, a dishwasher, X, so all of a sudden there's, 156 openings. Well, there's a fee amount per opening. Then is there a sewer services or a water services? All these different criteria come together, and our inspectors understand it, and I understand it. But then the average bearer or the contractor who's trying to keep track of this stuff, it gets a little difficult for them. So again, we could say the plumbing installation is $15,000. Here's the fee, straight off the schedule. So what this is suggesting is that these 4, what we call mechanical permits, basically make use of the same existing HVAC schedule, which is purely project cost-based. And so whether it's a sign contractor or plumbing or electric or HVAC, and we have several contractors that have multi-discipline shops, like a Masters or some of the others that actually do plumbing, heating, and electric. They can basically just use one fee schedule to help them calculate their fees as well. So does that kind of answer your question? And I can scroll through this and give you a sense of what was struck out. But again, it's very text-heavy, saying that plumbing permits are based on the number of fees, and is it a residential, is it commercial, is there a water service, is there a sewer service, is there irrigation, sprinkler system? So lots of different criteria that come together to calculate a fee, and we thought this would be just a good opportunity to condense them to use one fee schedule that is based on installation and materials cost.
So this schedule that's up there now that has the marginal cost as items 1 through 7, and then section F, G, and H, and continuing down with strikeouts, that will be replaced with this new schedule that is section 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Which is in your actual council packet.
So it makes it easier for someone to calculate it online.
Well, absolutely makes it easier for the contractors and our customers. And quite honestly, and again, our individual inspectors fully understand their fee schedules, and I do. But in the event that one of the inspectors is out in the field and somebody else comes in to pull a permit, sometimes it gets a little tricky, and they may have to say, well, we better wait until the inspector comes back to try and calculate that fee, or talk to Trummel. And if I'm available, I'll help them. But if I'm not, then we've got to ask them to wait.
And Mr. Trummel, if I could also add, one of the benefits of the software that we've implemented is online access for folks to get and apply for a permit. So this simplifying the fee structure does help with understanding, and particularly when we go to an online application process.
Right. And we've started that process. So folks do have the ability right now to do it. Now we're just starting to tinker with it. We're working out some bells and whistles a little bit, but hopefully it's going to make it a lot easier for our customer base to be able to at least submit the applications, understand what the costs are going to be involved with the project, and kind of move forward that way. So,
Well, this does make it a lot more understandable. And if I could make a request that this schedule be attached to the minutes for the future record,
Sure.
I think anyone then seeing the action we took could understand more clearly why
Absolutely.
we
Yep.
voted in support of it.
the other comment I'll make, and certainly if there's other questions, I'll try and answer those, is I really anticipate this being pretty much what I'd call budget neutral. It wasn't our attempt to increase fees or actually to substantially lower fees. But this is truly an apples and oranges, bringing them together. And I think, as my report suggested, after a year of experience, we can look at our historical numbers to see what we've collected in the way of revenue from fees for these permit processes. And if it's radically different, we'll certainly come back to council and ask for some feedback. Should we, did we miss the mark too much? Should we raise them? Should we lower them? That kind of thing. So.
I have a question, Mr. Trummel. How do you verify the dollar amount of, say, the plumbing contract and the?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, what's not included in this, because we do have a separate schedule for building permit fees, but our actual building code establishes per square foot construction cost based on experience across the country. And so as part of that, twice a year, they publish what we call just a square foot table that identifies use groups and construction type. And so you can plug this in, and if somebody walks in and says, hey, I'm going to build a new 10-story hotel and it's going to be $120,000, like, that's probably not very accurate. So we can actually just say it's a hotel use, certain construction type, regionally, here's what these numbers are looking like. And so Again, based on experience, the other mechanical trades kind of have the similar tables you can make reference to. And again, we're not trying to grind people into the ground as far as picking up another few dollars or less on a permit. But if we notice something is radically different or seems way off the mark, we'll ask the question to validate those. Great.
Mr. Nord?
Is this new fee schedule, is this mimicked off of somewhere else?
No, and so what these three other, so the electric, plumbing, and sign permit fee structures are being replaced and rolled into what is currently our HVAC schedule. So it's a schedule that we've used for heating heating, air conditioning, furnace, ventilation work for the 34 years I've been with the town. That's the schedule we've used.
Sure. I guess more what I meant was, like other users of Trackit, are they doing something similar to make the fee schedule work more seamlessly with the software?
Well, actually our existing or pre-existing software that we went to, that we were using before we implemented Trackit, we would have had the ability to do the same thing. Back in the day, we just chose to leave our schedules alone. So I guess to answer your question, I think there's only one other community in central Illinois that I'm aware of right now that's making use of Trackit, and that's Champaign. And I don't know that they necessarily use the same. Every community is a little bit different. In fact, we spend a lot of time responding to other communities who are going through fee surveys. Can you send us our fees and your fees? And honestly, I don't think they all use the same. Every community is a little bit different or unique about how they want to assess their fees. Okay. We just thought this was a good opportunity to try and make it universal in some aspects. So.
Sure. I've got one more question.
Sure.
So just looking at the schedule that you have up there, like item I guess, the one that's scratched out, it
Right.
says $9 per opening. I assume that means for like if you've got multiple sinks, each one of those is $9. So if you're doing like a hotel that's got lots of fixtures or like an apartment, those have lots of openings, right?
Right.
So this dramatically reduces a fee for them. Is that,
No.
am I reading it right?
Well, you are reading right. So I is the plumbing permit fee section of the municipal code. And so it talks about $9 an opening, and actually it would be $12 an opening because a hotel or an apartment would be considered a commercial project. But that's all that gets really clipped or accounted for in a permit fee. It's just the number of openings. And so yes, it can add up in a large building with like for example, probably more so like a student apartment. Hotels tend to just be the room, the kitchen sink, and a 3-fixture bathroom. And yes, that can be 300 or 400 fixtures in a 100-room hotel. But in an apartment unit where you've got 4 bedrooms or, with 4 bathrooms and 3 fixtures, and, just easily have 20, 25 openings in a unit times X number of units. I did run probably 10 or 15 scenarios of plumbing, electric, and sign permits based on the original schedule and this proposed new schedule. In some cases, Mr. Nord, some were higher, and in some cases, some were lower. And so on balance, I quite honestly think it's going to be about a wash. But again, after a year of experience, we can actually point back to it and give you a much better picture, like, wow, we way underestimated or overestimated what these fees impacts would be. But I think the goal here was for it to be budget neutral as best possible.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking of like the big projects there's a couple big ones that come to mind. There's the hotel that ISU's looking at doing, big student apartment complex, and there's lots of openings there. So I could see those fees being reduced significantly.
Yeah, possibly. Well, one, we don't get involved in the ISU projects, so that one's off the town's radar. So we don't get involved in the university projects. That's governed by the state. But you're right, and other hotel projects. But at the same time, a plumbing installation project for a large hotel could be, in fact, I think I ran a scenario of the H2 project, and it's probably approaching $1 million, in plumbing work. And so even off the conventional fee schedule, that's going to be a healthy permit fee. And again, we're not about wanting to say we've got healthy permit fees, but the idea is that we're,
right.
I think it's on balance would be about a wash.
Yeah, and I'm all for reducing fees, taking government out. It's just more, I just wanted to make sure that I was understanding correctly.
Good question. Yep.
Mr. McCarthy?
Thank you. So after all that, just making sure I'm level setting here. So budget neutral means the goal was to make this easier online and streamline the
Absolutely.
process for our business
Yes.
folks on our
I mean,
contractors.
that's the driving force behind
Okay.
even bringing this to you, is just to make it easier for our customers.
Yeah,
Certainly. So,
particularly if it was going to be budget neutral for us.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Further on this item? Please call the roll.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The ordinance is approved. We move to general orders. Two items on general orders tonight that are somewhat interconnected. Item 7 is an ordinance authorizing the 2019 property tax level.
Move approval.
Levy, not level.
Second.
Comments? Mr. McCarthy?
Yep, thank you, Mayor. Before voting, I wanted to share some thoughts about the topic before us. I guess first, we departed from our 100% pension funding commitment to take a one-year hiatus and to fund at 90%. I've been against this as a policy implication, but I agreed to it for 1 year to give us a little bit of a break. As I do every single year at pension time, I will bring this back up and remind us of our longstanding policy of 100% pension funding and obligation. And I hope all of us will make good on our commitment to go back to 100% pension funding and issue a property tax levy that is appropriate for 100% pension funding. Second, the council has a long tradition of taking well-measured action around property tax planning and our property tax levy. We typically let staff know ahead of time what we're thinking, and that gives staff the opportunity to consider the implications of our opinions and our desires around that and the consequences of any changes. This council did not do that last time. From the table, we cut $96,000 out of the property tax levy. We did that without considering the consequences on staff or operations, and we voted on it. Again, this departs from our longstanding tradition that's led this town and this council to have a AAA bond rating, and that bond rating saved the taxpayers tens of millions of dollars in bond proceeds. I'm hoping going forward we don't do that. I'm hoping we stick with our longstanding tradition of vetting any budgetary changes before being brought up at the table. I just want to add a reminder that we cut a levy for general operations. That levy had been in place for 16 years. So for 16 years, the town has not increased property tax levy to operate the government generally. 16 years, that's unheard of to not increase operational funding over 16 years. And again, partly that's led to our great bond rating. Well, since that meeting, staff's had the opportunity to consider what $96,000 does to our budget. And they let us know that that means we're going to lose our communication director position that we were in the process of hiring. A position that's been on our radar for nearly 5 years of strategic planning. And this entire council at some point or another has mentioned communication, better communication as a higher priority for this council. And we've been talking about it for nearly 5 years. In fact, in our part 1 of our strategic planning, we all supported better two-way communication as part of Pride and Normal. We had an opportunity to actually demonstrate that we were really committed to better communications with our citizens and everyone in the town. But we cut that funding. That cut meant $6 per year for the average taxpayer. So the average taxpayer would have paid 50 cents a month to fund a communication director and better communication that we've all said we wanted and we all said we've supported, but we didn't do that. Well, I'm going to ask that we give it another shot to that end, I'd like to motion that we restore $96,000 of funding back to the general fund levy operations.
Would you make that in the form of an
I
amendment?
move.
As an amendment?
As amendment, I move that we restore the $96,000 back to the general operation levy of the property tax to hire communications director.
And be clear, can you state the exact amount?
$96,000.
No, it's actually, Ms. Reese?
I missed the pennies.
I believe the number is $96,834. Is that match?
Yep.
That
Thank
would
you.
be the number that staff had included, I think, 2 council packets
I
ago.
apologize, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A second on that amendment?
$96,834, I believe, was the impact.
I neglected to write that down. I apologize.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion on the amendment. Mr. Nord?
I don't think it's a good idea for us to do that. I would like to see us, this is less than 0.1% of the overall budget that we're talking about. Out of $100 million, less than 0.1% is what we're talking about. There are other places we could save that money. We've got, for example, what I was going to talk about, which I had emailed you earlier, about just simply stockpiling black dirt and asphalt millings. Last bill cycle, there was $2,500. The bill cycle before that, there was $3,000. So there's $5,000 in just 1 month of what we went out and bought. Well, we had those resources that we could have stockpiled close, but yet we paid for them to be disposed of elsewhere. So essentially, we paid for it to go somewhere else, and we paid for it to come back. So you could basically double that number, $10,000, if we just simply stockpiled that. And over the course of a year, there's your $96,000. We could look at savings in many other places and try and save this money. I think we owe it to our taxpayers to at least try and save 0.1% off of our budget.
Further on the amendment?
Kathleen?
So if I understand correctly, what I think we're saying here, Mr. McCarthy is putting forward here, is that for a number of years, 2, I think for sure, maybe 3, as part of our strategic planning efforts, we as a council have, and councils before this one, have talked about the need for better communications from within City Hall out to the community. And we've placed that as a priority and put it on hold, I think, perhaps once, maybe not officially, but I know that in 17, 18, there was quite a bit of cuts that happened at this, of staff as part of some other budgetary cuts, and I think the administrative area felt the brunt of this, I think to the tune of maybe 10 or 12%, Ms. Reese, if I'm remembering
Closer to
correctly.
20.
Closer to 20? The cuts that your particular administrative area, when we didn't
Oh, just,
fill an assistant to the city manager.
Right.
Assistant to the assistant, the economic development. I feel like I'm missing another one.
exactly.
Cut 25
We went-
positions.
Yeah, we
25
we cut
positions.
7%, almost 7%
7%,
town-wide.
okay.
But in administration, I'd have to think it through. I think we had 5 positions or 6. We're down to 3 folks.
Okay, and so that was part of those budget reductions that came in the form of staff reductions in the 2017-18 budget.
Yep.
And so what I think I hear you saying is that we put this on hold, or we have, we've not acted on it for a number of years despite it being a priority. And so, and we know, or we think we hear, that our communications could be better. on a number of things, large scale and small scale. And so I think what I hear you saying is that we really shouldn't continue to not fill that position and not fill that role, more importantly. And what difference does this make by increasing the levy by $96,834? What does that translate to in terms of, I guess, per taxpayer bill? If you've got it down to there, can you kind of parse it down to something? What are we talking about here?
It was,
Yes, because of a couple meetings ago, when council talked about the tax levy, we had some different scenarios. Under this particular scenario that Mr. McCarthy is talking about, with a 90% funding level for police and fire pensions, and then the IMRF change, which we had talked about, based on their different rate of earnings, their increased or reduced earnings assumptions, Social Security, and then the $1.6 million for the general fund, that would result in a total levy of about $13 million. That's what we had talked about 2 council meetings ago. With that levy, that would result in a property tax rate of 1.46332. So basically $1.46.
Okay. And then,
Whereas what's in the packet tonight is $1.45.
Okay.
1.45247. The impact on an average home, which we believe is, we typically use as $165,000, would be $6.04 a year, the impact of that levy at that rate.
that was the 50 cents a month I was talking about.
okay. So what we're talking about here is for $6 a year, we could offer better communication, is what I'm hearing you say. And I just think about how we've gotten, well, personally, I know I've gotten feedback that we don't communicate well. And I mean, communication is a profession. And, I think there's a lot of us out here who are not formally trained in the art and science of communication, who we try to communicate well, but there is a real profession to communications, particularly large organizations. And I think we have, looking at it both from a council perspective as well as a resident perspective, I do think we fall short on our ability to communicate large and small. And I mean, just not to drum up past discussions and debates, but I mean, think about how I think about the neighbors in Blackstone Trails. And, that was a big deal about the property there and the impact of a fire station. And, one of their chief concerns was that they didn't have a lot of advance notice. Maybe a communications professional would have guided us better on that, would have been able to tease out intent versus impact. And, our intentions, I think, 100% of the time are good, but sometimes I think, we trip over what is an unintended impact. And that, to me, was a perfect example of where our intentions were good and are good to put fire station and support closer to an area of our community, and yet the impact was miserable. And that's just one example of where I think my expectation of this role would be to do better. And then even small things, whether it's, I don't know how many of you have gotten this one, but I have a lot lately, leaves being picked up, and when's the last time for the landscape waste, and how can I put my landscape waste out there? Some of those more mundane and operational things that we should all have committed to memory, but somehow, every November it comes around in the fall and the leaf drop is different, and so, you get the person that says, my leaves have been on the curb for 3 weeks, and it's, even the small and mundane things. And that's where I would expect this role to do better. So if that's what we're looking at trying to restore, then perhaps we need to rethink this.
Ms. Smith and then Mr. Preston.
I would vote that I think this would be a bad faith move on our part to take this action tonight when we had no public comment. We have primarily town staff in the gallery, and that after making a public display of wrestling with difficult budget matters in front of a broad audience, to now reverse our decision on that. I think that would be a bad message to communicate. That while I concur that communication is problematic, I don't think it rises above the necessity of properly funding our pensions, and that to restore $96,000 for a staffing position that will then be subject to participation in that pension program over an effort to restore 100% funding is the wrong priority. This is the first budget opportunity this council will have with a new mix of individuals that are asking questions from a new perspective. And it will be hard, but I fully believe that we are capable of finding that 96,000 if we put our minds to it and challenge some of the things that have been in place. That's not to say there was anything wrong with the way things have been done in the past, but instances like simplifying a fee schedule and making it easier for consumers to access, who knows what that might do to encourage builders to want to work with our community, because we have made it easier. We have facilitated their ability to do that. Technology is constantly changing how many people are needed to be productive. And so I would be strongly against reneging on a public commitment we made just 1 month ago in front of a full gallery when we don't have those witnesses sitting here now.
Mr. Preston?
Thanks, Mayor. So this conversation and this amendment began in the context tonight of talking about standard council practice and things that we have followed as a working group that have made us a highly functioning one throughout the years. And I'm slightly confused or surprised, I guess, by that, because another longstanding council tradition that I think we all have valued and think contributes to our productivity as a working body is that of not rehashing the same issue once votes have been taken. And on the principle, I like the concept of once, the sitting council decides on an issue, that issue then has been decided on, and we, and move forward from there rather than relitigating past votes. I would also suggest that while there was conversation about the value of the additional $96,000 from an organization standpoint, a town standpoint, that on the flip side of that, the money coming from our residents and our property owners is something that should be taken into account. So over the last 9 years or so, if referring back to our council packet from 2 meetings ago when we first discussed this, since 2010, the town tax rate over those last 9 years has increased a total of about 29.6%, while all other taxing bodies for people who live in Normal have only increased over that same period of time about 12.6%. on our residents. And, in light of that, I think that reducing the tax rate for the residents and the property owners in Normal, I thought it was a good decision 2 meetings ago, and I still do now.
Ms. Cummings?
Thank you. It's kind of, I just need to, I've heard a lot, and one of the things that is interesting to me is we base a lot of our budget and thought processes off of things we do oftentimes a year or more in advance. I believe that we come to the table trying to resolve what will be best for the community at large. And, it's funny that there's some pieces still missing in order to put out a certain kind of message. If we want to go back to what we've always done, then we've always funded at 100%. And we've never stood away from that. And either you supported or you did not support us funding at 100%. And we've always paid our levy. And to me, that is bottom line. And yes, we've made some different changes this year, considering, I think we've all considered whether or not what the impacts would be. The first step was to do the 90% versus our typical 100%. But I think what's more heartening is based off of what was believed that we could move forward, we had even started the process for hiring a communications person. We had put it out. People turned in applications with their resumes, and then we had to put that on hold. For me, that is something that's very critical. I agree with Councilmember LORENZ. There are people who are educated more in this. They know how to create full communications strategies. Those are actual classes that you can take. Sometimes some of them are more than one semester, specifically in order to be able to successfully communicate, whether it's for a business like State Farm or OSF or any of our other large businesses, or you're creating communication strategies for communities like ours, or larger. So that is something that sticks out for me. The other thing to take note is, we can talk about and figure out roundabout ways to cut money, but once again, that's usually a conversation we have at budget time where we're sitting around the table, and no one has brought that up in the previous budget session about let's cut certain things to make certain other things happen. And so I feel like I understand where people want to make cuts and people want to reduce services and reduce some of the allocations and things that we currently do. I get it, but there's a time for that, and that's at budget time. And right now, we need to make a decision on how we're going to address this levy. Are we going to do it the way we've done it, which we've already kind of strayed away from because we're not funding at 100%? But are we going to make this adjustment? One thing people do not understand, all of us on here are taxpayers, so we all feel that $6 pinch on properties. So we will all see that $6 per year increase on the taxes.
Thank you. Mr. McCarthy?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I guess I was going to share some of what my colleague, Ms. Cummings, just did, but to reiterate that, my opening comment was about our practice of how we budget and being able to understand consequences before we take votes. And again, I'm going to urge us, I hope that we continue in that practice going forward. But I want to comment on something my colleague, Mr. Preston, said. He mentioned a percentage of increase in tax rate. I want to be clear, make sure that the media is all on this. We're not talking about tax rate tonight, we're talking about a levy. And so for the last 3 years, the levy has been flat, 0% increase. It was in our packet, right here. It says 17, 18, 19 is flat. If we do this action, this amendment, the 96,000, what's the actual number? 500 and some odd dollars.
$34.
It is 0.8% of an increase. 0.8% of an increase in levy. Just to be clear, I don't want to confuse the media or our residents the difference between a levy and a tax rate. So in 17, we asked for a number, 18, we asked for the same number, 19, I'm suggesting we increase that by 0.8%, that's it. To fund a communication position that we all agree we want to do better at. That's it.
Mr. Nord?
Some other ways that we could look at raising some revenues. There's rent on town properties that we have that are being rented for, well, there's one that got approved yesterday because the council did absolutely nothing for free rent. There's other properties that the town has rented that are very, very small dollar amounts. We could raise those rents. The marijuana tax that we approved, that's going to be brand new revenue coming in. So that's money that could be allocated towards this $96,000. The bike share program is coming up. I don't know, we may not be funding that again. That could be money that could be coming in. The sports complex study, are we going to be funding another sports complex study? Is that, if we're not, that could be money that we're saving as well. Last month, finance was at the table saying that they refinanced a bond, and I believe the amount savings was it $100,000? Is that what we saved? $135,000 over the lifetime of the bond. Then we've got these options and new revenues coming in. Some other expenses we could save on, the uptown rent, street signs. But we talk about this only being $6 or $8 per household. Well, when you look at any one individual tax, it's not that much when you talk about it whenever you talk about it as just the tax by itself. But people are leaving the state, and they're leaving it because of the taxes, not because of just one tax. It's because of all the taxes combined. It's death by 1,000 taxes. And I agree with Ms. Smith. She's exactly right. There is a distrust in government. We told the community, it was in the paper, that this is what we were going to be doing. This property tax levy is what it was. And now we are changing it at the last minute. That is going to create more distrust, I fear. And I think it is a bad idea. We've got lots of options. We've got money coming in that's not allocated yet, the marijuana tax. So I just don't see this being good.
Ms. Lorenz?
I want to go back to the 90% thing for just a minute, but then talk about some other challenges we have. To a point that's been made about taking a one-year hiatus from the 90%, from 100% funding of police and fire pension, and we dropped it back to 90% because that's the required amount. Taking a year off from funding at 100% is going to be harder in the next year to jump back to that pace. And the best analogy that I think of in my mind is if you've got young children and you're trying to save for their future education, and those increases are happening at, 6 or 10% a year or something crazy that higher education goes up each year. We were to have taken a year off from saving for college funds, just 1 year. The trajectory of our funding would be altered. It's not just you take a year off and then resume where you were. So I think we have to be very clear-eyed about the fact that the bigger change in the discussion that we had a month ago was really about that very philosophical change of 90%. it didn't come on me easily. I look out and I see representatives of our police and fire, and it was hard. It was really hard. So I think we need to be very clear-eyed about what a one-year hiatus may or may not mean. I don't think we will be able to it's not very elastic. We won't be able to come right back up and jump in if we're even able to a year from now. So that was the bigger thing, and if I remember correctly, I even introduced that amendment. The way the conversation went on then a month ago was that it got really kind of wrapped around this, relatively speaking, it's not small to me, but in the grand scheme of this organization, a relatively small number of $96,000, which as you described is 0.8% of what we're talking about here. So we are talking about a fairly small amount of money to potentially restore. And when you think about it, we've got a lot of other challenges facing us. Not the least of which will be minimum wage requirements. I mean, I think we've got some estimates now of what that may mean to us, but come January, when we've got more budget discussions to be had, we're going to be talking about numbers far bigger than $96,000. And so I'm here thinking, to take the philosophy of press one lever at a time, change one variable at a time. And that's what I intended to do with my amendment last month. One variable, a big variable albeit, to change from 100% funding to 90% funding. And let's just leave it alone, especially in light of the fact that the very thing that was not at least made aware to me at the time, was the impact that it would have on this issue that I'm hearing time and time and time again from residents about better transparency, better communication, more access, more say-so. And that's what that communications professional ought to be able to do. I think we need to think about the fact that what we have ahead of us is even a bigger conversation in January about the rest of the budget. This is just a portion of our overall general fund. And so we'll be able to talk for 6 hours or more about where we'll need to cut. And believe me, we're going to, if estimates that I'm hearing about the increases in minimum wage are in fact even partway true. So I, like I said, am really thinking that we need to honor the direction, the strategy that we've given to staff in past strategic planning sessions for a number of years. We know currently that need is still here for better communication, and I think we need to refrain from doing the kind of shoot from the hip kind of budget decisions that perhaps happened in that discussion.
Mr. Preston.
Mr. McCarthy, a few minutes ago, had referenced the fact that we are setting the levy here and that we don't directly set rates, but we set levies. And of course, that is correct. And I also then think that the people of Normal should be glad to know that anytime we set a property tax levy, we do so looking at and having the knowledge of what the impact of that levy is on the individual property owners in the town of Normal. We have educated guesses based on what we are anticipating from the township assessor, the EAV change to be, and as a result, very simple math creates the rate, and that has always been, the tax rate has always been something that has been part of the conversation and has been projected any time that we vote on a levy that comes before us. I'm thinking about how personally I would feel standing in front of constituents of all of ours, since we're all at large, who were led to believe after our conversation 2 meetings ago that their property tax rate, after, the feeling of taxes and fees just continually being raised on them, year after year, be it with property taxes or otherwise, them being led to believe that the property tax rate would be reduced this year, and they would, small or not, feel some small relief from the town of Normal, facing them that now, without any advance notice and without any advance knowledge that was public ahead of this meeting tonight, that that may change, and that in fact the tax rate would not be reduced for them, but instead likely increased, small amount or not. That is something that I just, in my mind, keep going back to. Those are the people that we serve, and for the residents of Normal, I am not comfortable, nor do I think that we should completely negate and change course from the last conversation or the last decision that we had, and certainly the last public conversation that took place on this issue.
Ms. Smith.
Piggybacking on Mr. Preston's, I make it my business to read a variety of news sources, and this action was actually predicted in an online blog. And if we are justifying this as a funding vehicle for a position of someone in communication, I think that is sending the wrong message, period. And while it is distasteful to have an opening posted and then to close that to candidates who might be pursuing it, I have a master's degree because I was hiding out in graduate school after one recession, and we're here in Normal because the most recent recession caused both my husband and myself to be out of work and to look elsewhere. And private enterprise all the time has to make difficult decisions. I've heard council members indicate that this will be a tough decision to get us back to 100% funding, but those muscles need exercise, and I think we can start with figuring out how to recover $96,000 from somewhere in the budget, and then also find the 10% funding. But if we fall back to making a statement 1 month and then rescinding that a month later, we're never going to find out if we're strong enough to do this.
I'm just going to be brief. We've had all our conversations here. To me, this is a correction of an error of process for the town. This is something, the communications position was offered up as an outcome that could have happened as a result of this budget. But I think it's very clear that in our budgeting for revenues, that we be deliberate and careful in doing that. And I don't feel we did that last meeting. I think if you look back at that tape, that decision was made in about 3 minutes. Caught staff completely off guard in terms of what we were doing. And so that's why I'm in support of moving this forward. I see it as correcting an error in policy and process. And Mr. Nord, I'm going to invoke Robert's Rules of Order on this. Everybody's spoken twice on this item.
I do have just a question. It's not a debate.
Let me finish here.
It's
I'm just, everybody has spoken twice. According to Robert's Rules of Order, people can speak twice on each issue. And Mr. Preston, I will allow your question as a question.
It is. As a matter of process, if this amendment does pass, does it do so as the authorization to prepare the levy as was the ordinance that we actually approved 2 meetings ago? Or does this actually authorize the levy itself, since we would be changing what the approved proposed levy that was prepared
Right.
is, right?
Mr. Day can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe if council, with the motion, it simply amends the ordinance before council tonight. I don't,
And we vote on
is that accurate?
That's correct. Yeah, the motion on the floor is to pass the ordinance, so this would be an amendment to the ordinance.
But isn't there a statutory requirement that once a tax levy ordinance is prepared, that then there's a certain amount of time given for public feedback, which would not have been allowed under this proposed amendment?
I'm deferring to legal counsel on that one.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Let me ask it a different way. Why do we typically prepare the property tax levy and then a meeting or two later actually vote to authorize it?
Right. A month ago, council authorized the preparation, or directed staff to prepare the levy. And so I guess the question is, if we modify the levy, do we have to go back to that first step of preparing a modified levy?
No, what we have to, the statutory requirement is to pass the levy by the last Tuesday in December is our requirement. So our motion to prepare is really just to give notice of process of doing the levy. Typically, that comes into play in case there's going to be a situation where you've got a truth in taxation issue, where the levy's increasing more than the rate's increasing more than the 5%, and there's some extra steps that are required there. So the motion to prepare the levy is to prepare us in case we need to do the truth in taxation requirements. But the statutory requirement for passing the levy is just that we pass the levy by the last Thursday in December.
Tuesday? I think it's Tuesday.
Tuesday, sorry.
Yeah.
Just so I fully understand. So then, if in the future we are not, over the line where truth in taxation would come into play, and we, would not be proposing over 5%, are you saying that there is not a statutory reason why we would have an ordinance to authorize, and then at a later meeting, the ordinance that actually approves the levy, like we've traditionally done?
Correct. I don't think there's a statutory or a legal requirement to do so, but we do it as a matter of public notification, as long as we're under the truth in taxation limit.
Okay. All right.
Please call the roll.
Ms. Smith?
Point of order, could you restate what we're voting on?
Mr. McCarthy?
I want to make sure I get the number right this time. The motion is to amend to the ordinance to add back $96,834,000 to the levy to bring it to $13,055,328.
I vote no.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
No.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
No.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The amendment is approved. Now we're back to the original authorizing the 2019 property tax levy. Is there discussion on this item? Mr. Nord?
Just to be open and transparent for our taxpayers, I move that we table this to the next meeting.
Second.
I'm going to ask you to hold that until other people, if they want to have a comment on that, because once a motion to table is moved and seconded, there's no further discussion. So can you hold that until other people, if they wish to speak? If not, go ahead and make the motion.
I kind of already did. I don't know the Robert's Rules of Order.
Motion to table ends all discussion on the item, and we vote on to table or not.
Mr. Preston?
I don't have a problem with, taking back my second to see if there's other conversation, with the understanding that the motion would come back up, but I didn't make the motion originally.
So we have a motion, we do not have a second.
Okay, then that's fine. I take it back.
Is
See
there
if there's
anyone
discussion.
that wants to speak on that?
Speak on what, the table?
Okay. So
I move to
motion-
table.
Move to table?
Second.
Second. And the motion to table has to be date-specific till the next meeting, is that?
To the next meeting, and that puts us within the statutory timeline?
No, if you do this, you will be outside unless you have some special meeting to pass the levy. It has to be done by the, oh,
No,
I'm sorry.
Our
We've
next
got
meeting
one
would
more
be,
meeting.
yes, I think that does fall within the requirements. Our next meeting is scheduled for Monday, December 16, so that does give us some time to get it on file with the county by the required date.
Yeah, I
Sure.
can't operate a calendar.
Then I think to respect our constituents who are going to question us on this, give them time to respond.
Please call the roll. This is a motion to table.
Do we discuss this motion or not?
We cannot discuss a motion to table.
Mrs. Lorenz?
No.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
No.
Mrs. Cummings?
No.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
No. The motion to table does not pass. We're back again to authorizing the abatement of, authorizing the 2019 property tax levy. Please call the roll.
Mr. Preston?
No.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
No.
Ms. Smith?
No.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The 2019 property tax levy is approved. Item 8 is an ordinance authorizing the abatement of the 2019 property taxes for debt service. Motion for approval?
Move approval?
Second.
Just for background, we're required to do this every year with our general obligation bonds. If we are not able to pay our general obligations bonds, we would have to, by law, issue a levy to cover that debt. And because we do have the funds to cover the bonds, we have to abate that levy, and that's what this action does tonight. Is there discussion on the item? Please call the roll.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
No.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The ordinance is approved. We have one item of new business tonight, and that is a presentation of the Community Development Block Grants Program Draft of 2020 to 2024 Consolidated Plan and Program Year 2020 to 2021 Action Plan.
Thank you. Associate Planner Taylor Long is going to present some information about the CDBG program, and we'll be happy to answer any questions when he's done. Sure. Thanks, Taylor.
Thank you, Ms. Reese. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Here tonight to essentially just kick off the last public phase of communication and review for the consolidated plan, and additionally just to kind of outline what we plan to do, or draft anyway, propose to do for the upcoming first program year within that 5-year plan, the 2020-2021 action plan. So I'll be a lot more brief than I was last time up here, but just want to hit on the priorities that we discussed last time, just quickly, because essentially the consolidated plan boils down to these priorities. So these are the public services priorities that the community, stakeholders, staff, and council in a sense already took a look at here. So, or were presented to staff. So public services were capped at 15% again. So it's not a great deal of money each year to put toward these 8 very important public services. But so that's just something to keep in mind. A lot of majority of these were, or at least youth services, and one that's kind of always implied is homeless services or homeless outreach and prevention. And those were kind of common, but the rest of these were new for this 5-year plan. So anything that's not a public service then is what we have here listed. So that's about $256,000 a year. Again, not a lot. That's not a great deal of money that we get to address these big ticket items, but I would just keep that in mind, I guess, as we move forward here. But there's no requirement that we address all these priorities at least or every during each program year, and also we don't have to touch on all of them at any point during the 5-year plan. But anything we do has to tie back to these. So when we come back to you at budget time, and then when there's another public comment period and a public hearing for each action plan, you'll get to see these, and we'll have to explain how these tie back to these, how our activities tie back to these priorities. So with that, then, this was kind of outlined in your council packet, but this is the kind of draft budget for the first year of this new consolidated plan. So we propose to get, or we expect to get about $396,000 this year. That's pretty consistent. Also estimate a program income of about $2,000, and that generally comes from down payment assistance. That's when people move out of their home sooner than their grant was to run through. So that money comes back to the town and then is reprogrammed as down payment assistance. So we routinely never get $2,000, but HUD asked that we put a number there. So that's pretty conservative. Public services, then, we propose to kind of just continue what we've been doing because of the fact that they were high priorities this time around again. So after school and youth and family activities at the Unity Community Center on Orlando Avenue, and then homeless outreach services provided by PATH based out of Bloomington, but that's available to any homeless or at-risk homeless person who happens to end up in Normal and can receive assistance. So that's about $59,400 a year we anticipate to go toward public services. So then everything that's not a public service, we have what is a new priority for us is homeowner housing rehabilitation. So also accessibility improvements. So we tried to marry those two together. So and came up with a number of different ways we can address those over in this first, and then likely, perhaps the next 4 years after that. So Chief there is taking what used to be general funded homeowner emergency repair and accessibility program and funding that with CDBG, and that was the case, I guess, some years back before I was here anyway. So that program would cover things like roof repairs, water heaters and furnace repairs, stuff like that. It's just kind of basic life safety type things for housing. So the partnership with Habitat for Humanity and their A Brush with Kindness program would address things that our program wouldn't. So that'd be very limited roofing repairs, as well as siding, windows, doors, things of that nature. Some degree of landscaping as well. And then finally, to kind of marry accessibility improvements here with homeowner housing rehabilitation, we're proposing to partner with AMBUCS, the local branch here in Bloomington Normal, to do owner-occupied accessibility ramp construction. So anything we do housing rehab here it could happen anywhere in Bloomington, or in Normal rather, but it would have a person would have to be making less than 80% AMI, and qualify as low to moderate income with HUD standards. So next thing there, and this is the big ticket item for infrastructure improvements. You'll recall in years past it's been the case that street resurfacing was the big ticket item as far as CDBG goes and infrastructure. And so that was the case 5 years ago, and in this public outreach process for this consolidated plan, that's kind of been flipped in a sense. So we're proposing about $197,000 for infrastructure improvements, but that'll principally be sidewalk and ADA ramp construction, and all that money really will be sidewalk and ADA ramp construction. So additionally there, then we have property acquisition, and that would be for the acquisition of right-of-way for sidewalks in low to moderate income neighborhoods of neighborhoods of Normal. Lastly there, then we have program administration. So you'll see at the bottom there, general administration, $8,750. So the staff side administration, it's never the case that we use that money. HUD just requires us to put them out there. So we've gotten them out there, and what doesn't get used will just be folded into either the housing, public facility improvements, and other community development opportunities, or, really there. I guess that's the only place it can go. Also there, a new program for us is with, this is a partnership with Prairie State Legal Services for anti-housing discrimination assistance. This would aim to assist at least 10 clients this first year. And so this program, as well as the ones with Habitat and AMBUCS, we kept them in a kind of a conservative amount, and it's spelled out in more detail in the action plan. We kept those at low amounts because these are new programs for them and us, and we want to ensure that we don't overstretch ourselves. Lastly there, then, on the public administration side would be $20,000 for McLean County Regional Planning Commission's Regional Housing Advisory Committee. And so that's the committee we've worked with on getting this consolidated plan drafted, as well as a great deal of research, a data dashboard that was created. And now that we'll have the consolidated plan done and all this background research, we can actually get to the work of identifying areas of the community or different financing or otherwise tools that we have to foster affordable housing in Bloomington Normal. So that's kind of a summary of the the draft budget there for this first year. Oh, I think a slide got cut out here. Anyway, I can summarize and just tell you that, so the public comment period for this plan, and the action plan and the consolidated plan that'll start up tomorrow morning. We'll have the plans, we'll have the plans on the town's website as regional planning, as well as regional planning's website, at the library, at the clerk's office, and we'll promote it every which way we can. Promotion of that's already started through a number of means. You may have seen some notices in the paper as well as on Facebook. So that comment period will run for 40 days. We're required to do 30, but we figured with the holidays we'll add on some extra days. That'll run through January 11th, 2020. Within the comment period then, there'll be a public hearing, the final one, essentially for this consolidated plan, and there have been many now. Final one, and that'll be at the keep bringing up Bloomington, Normal Public Library on Tuesday, December 17th. That'll start at 5:30. That'll be in the cafe space on the first floor. So from 5:30 to 6:30, we'll talk about the consolidated plan, and then 6:30 to 7:30, we'll talk about the action plan. And if it ends up being a small group there, we'll just mix those topics together. But we wanted to provide people a time frame of when things might get discussed. So. After that, then after the comment period's wrapped up, any comments we might have will fold into the action plan and consolidated plan and bring that back to you for review on Monday, January 20th. After that, then once it's been approved by council, it just needs to be submitted to HUD. That has to be done so by February 15th, and then program year starts up April 1st. So that's when these new programs we're proposing would kick off. So with that said, be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions? Ms. Smith?
So the budget numbers you have up there, will it have to be the same for every year?
It would not. No. So we and that's the consolidated plan's kind of made to be amended too, in a sense. So you just kind of have to forecast what you think it would be. But no, any of these numbers can change based on. Well, say if the town's homeowner emergency repair and accessibility program, we end up not having as many beneficiaries or clients in a sense this first year, and we've got a bunch of carryover, then we won't add as much to it the following year. And I would add too, there's a carryover money from previous grant years that's tied to things like street resurfacing and sidewalk and ADA ramp construction, sewer linings, down payment assistance. Those funds are we've already told HUD we would use that for that. So you'll see those things occur in this, likely in this first action plan year. And down payment assistance especially, we've got quite a lot of money there that we propose keeping that program in place and just using that money up. And if it sits there too long, HUD will be mad at us, as well as we'll just want to reprogram it and use it elsewhere.
Thank you.
Further questions? Thank you, Taylor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's the update. Before taking a motion for adjournment, we'll go to concerns and comments, and I'll start. I talk about the Citizen Summit that some of you may or may not have heard about that is happening Thursday from 6 to 9 o'clock at the Community Activity Center in One Normal Plaza. This came out of a discussion at our council retreat where we were talking about town values, what we cared about, what we didn't necessarily care about, things that might have wanted to change. And the council pretty unanimously decided that this Citizen Summit would be a good program to do. And the structure of the summit is each council member recommended 5 to 7 people who would come to this meeting by invitation. And the requirement was that they're a resident or a business owner in the town of Normal. And then those groups would be broken down into 7 different tables representing, the number of council members that recommended people, so that we have a diversity of people at each table to discuss issues. And this will be somewhat of a facilitated discussion that will happen at these tables to get citizens' input on some of the things we're talking about in our strategic plan. Council members are not allowed to interact. We're there to observe. Those are the rules we agreed to, that we're there to observe what the citizens are doing. We're not going to answer questions. We're not going to say, wait a minute, you need to consider this. None of that happens. This is for the citizens to actually do a deep dive into some of the issues the council's dealing with. There may be people that come that want to observe this because the council members are there. It will be an open meeting, but it's not an open participation meeting by any means. We pick the citizens. The citizens that come will probably be given an opportunity, depending on how many tables we have, to sit down and do that exercise. But really, the focus of it is the, what would that be? 35 to 42 people that were invited by the council to come to this event. So that event happens at 6 o'clock, goes till 9 o'clock this Thursday at the Community Activity Center at 1 Normal Plaza. Scott, I'll talk to you about that.
I just wanted to mention that staff does intend to get this posted, and we certainly will post this as an open meeting as required, as we always do, 48 hours or more before the event. Staff's, frankly, I'm in a little bit of a difficult situation at the moment because I was filling the mayor in prior to coming up to this meeting, that it came to my attention that it has been posted like, for example, on the Nord for Normal site. And that puts me in a little bit of a conundrum because I cannot participate in political rallies. And neither can staff. So somehow I called Lyle Simic to ask for direction because it needs to be clear that it is a council event and not a political rally event. Because it is many of the staff, Mr. Hanson, myself included, we have a code of ethics and an obligation to not participate in any political rallies. And so there's just a few things that I need to evaluate with Mr. Day, with Lyle Simic, and then we'll get this posted accordingly. But I just want to put it out there that staff has to be careful on how we participate in this event until it's clear what the event is. So.
And I think that the issue, whether it was intentional or not, is the postings referenced, sponsored by Nord for Normal. And I think that's what gave staff the heartburn on that event. Mr. Nord.
The image that was up there clearly said this was hosted by the Town of Normal Council. The hosted part that you're saying by Nord for Normal, that's the Facebook piece that says that. And if you look at most of our sites, I believe everyone has shared something about some town event. So this is not a political thing. This is getting awareness out to the public for an open meeting. And at this summit that we had, or at this meeting that we had before, there was no vote as to what we were going to do. This was something that the facilitator recommended we do, and that anybody from the public that shows up will be a participant. And he was communicated with. I asked you, Ms. Reese, about communicating this to the public as well. And, this is a public open meeting. The public should be invited. And this is what was laid out. And there was no vote that was taken as to it was only going to be for people that we invited. That was, in order to get a minimum number of people to show up, we were asked to invite so many people. But what I was going to talk about for the closing was something different, but now I'm going to talk about something else. So I went to a church service with Pastor Bennett at the City Refuge in Bloomington. And what he talked about, I wish he was here because I'm not going to do him justice. He was talking about decisions in our life. They need to be made in some order. And our decisions are out of order. We should be making our decisions based on what God asks us to do, then based on what we want to do. And what made me think about this tonight is in government, we all answer to the people. We should make our decisions first based upon what the people want before we make them on how we want government to spend their money. You know, the people are first. That's the order that it should be in. And for us tonight to change that order by first telling people that, hey, we are going to not adjust your property taxes, and then not even be open and transparent and essentially raise them. That's just out of order. And that's something that I think is very relevant, and I wish he could come in and talk, because he will do this much more justice than what I've tried to do.
Again, as I stated in my comments, that whether it was intentional or not, it did cause staff some concern in terms of the posting. And I'm looking at it right now. It says Citizen Summit, conversation, please share. Interested, going, share, more. 1110 South Douglas, or Douglas Street, normal, blah, blah, blah. Public event sponsored by Nord for Normal.
Does it say on there, hosted by the Normal
I'll
Town
share it to
Council?
you after the meeting.
And in the
It does
description,
say,
it says that as well.
hosted by the,
And I would imagine if we look through most of our personal pages, there are things as well that are on there as well. But this
Again,
is something, somebody has to subscribe to look at this.
again, it caused some staff some concern because they have code of ethics issues that they have to abide by.
Right, I'm just sharing that to express that there's just some things that I need to follow up on tomorrow, and we, as I stated, will always comply with the law and get it posted as an open meeting because council will be there. I have to figure out what staff's role will be at this point. So,
I just wish in the future we'd be more proactive in communicating with the public these open meetings.
Let's come back to order here and not, and we'll, please be recognized by the chair, and let's not make this a discussion comments tonight. Ms. Cummings.
Thank you. Thank you. I have to get back to my train of thought here. I've recently, as you all know, I've attended the National League of Cities annual city summit. And I want to say, number one, job well done on some of the work that's being done. I'm on one of the committees, the Community and Economic Development Federal Advocacy Committee, and Denise Moore, who is a council person out of Peoria, sat on the task force for the housing initiative, which a lot of the committees also put resolutions that, assisted with some of that work as well. And so we have, I have brought back the actual book that the task force put together, which shows studies on housing and how we can do better about housing and what that will look like in the future and what's needed. What's very interesting, it was the constant conversation on creating intergenerational communities and what will that look like going forward. So know that for me, I don't just sit here. I continue to educate myself. I continue to get myself involved in other communities and learning what they're doing and their best practices. And we kind of glean and learn from each other. And that's how we'll get better together. And it's an amazing time. Some people are doing some amazing things. And then we're also doing some amazing things. And we are a well-recognized community, not just in this state. I had someone from San Francisco who saw my name tag and said normal, and the next thing that came out their mouth was Rivian. And that's an amazing feeling when you're talking to somebody from San Francisco who knows where Normal, Illinois is and can relate it to something that we're doing that is very great. So I have to share that because a lot of times our success story gets lost in the minutia and the nonsense of other things that are being spouted out. But let me tell you, we are looked at as a very progressive community, that we're doing the right things and we're moving in the right direction. And I would hope that each and every one of you will want us to continue that way. Another thing that must be said, it keeps being said, yes, there are people who are leaving the state, but McLean County grew. And there's facts for that. McLean County grew as a community. So we want to keep that. Yes, there's some other issues. We can't necessarily say it's one thing. there's a myriad of issues. I know even for the African-American community, a lot of them aren't leaving necessarily because of taxes. There's a lot of other issues we have to talk about, but there's a lot of great things that we're doing. And a lot of great people who are here in our community as well as throughout Central Illinois who are doing some amazing things, and this is a great place to be.
Mr. Preston, no, I'm just going right down the line.
Okay. I am sitting here and still holding on to this, so I feel like I just need to express it, and now's the time. You know, it is tonight's property tax levy vote. It is certainly one thing to change the levy and take a vote different from how it was previously. But the part I keep holding on to is the failed motion to table. And I'm really, to be honest, I'm kind of disheartened by that, in that by not tabling it, the property tax levy as approved, and, you know, as either, which it was approved tonight or would have been approved, that levy was not established with any time for any kind of citizen knowledge or feedback at all before the final vote on that was taken. And, you know, that certainly flies in the face of the practice that we have always had every year. I've been on council, and I believe for long before. You know, I'm sitting here and I still think it is unfortunate. You know, issue is one thing, people can vote how they want, but not allowing any time when we easily could have and still fallen within the requirements of when this needs to be passed. And as a result, not allowing any kind of constituent feedback or engagement on this issue, I think is unfortunate.
Ms. Lorenz.
I want to say that I'm excited about the 5 to 7 people that I requested an invitation to the Citizen Summit for them to come to. Most of them, I think, are able to come. And I just want to offer that, you know, I took that assignment really seriously and carefully and thought about the 5 or 7 people that represented a range of thoughts and a range of even geographic locations. I didn't want to invite all of my neighbors, you know, that live in a particular neighborhood. I thought about, you know, inviting a teacher. I thought about inviting retired persons. I thought about inviting the person who's seen his house of his, the value of his house dramatically decrease because of some of the changes going on in this community in the housing market. You know, I thought of the person that is just like the biggest cheerleader ever, you know. And so I very intentionally and very thoughtfully selected my 7 people because of the range of opinions and persuasions that they represent. And I think most of them are able to come. I think there's a few who haven't yet committed. And I just really am looking forward to them being part of this process. And I do hope that the come one, come all sense that maybe the Facebook event that's been put out there doesn't drown out the well thought out selection and variety of members that I'm sure we probably all have invited. So I really want this to be a very productive focus group. I welcome people to come, you know, who want to observe. And I really hope we can pull this off without any problems. And, you know, I guess case in point of why we do need a professional communications person on staff is the fact that, you know, Councilmember Nord felt the need to have to do this and not only post it, but actually boost it, you know, with some additional dollars spent to you know, perpetuate the appearance of this particular Facebook event in news feeds, and that's how I saw it, as a sponsored event. So, you know, I want it to be viewed as a good thing. The intention is good, and I don't want that to get lost in the noise of everything else.
Ms. Smith.
I want to take this Monday after Thanksgiving to give a big Thanksgiving to the town staff that despite the holiday, the packet was on our door Thursday night when we came back from a trip to Chicago, which meant that probably some of the staff were busy putting the last-minute touches on it, and that someone in our police department ran by the house to do it, that trash collection and leaf pickup did not stop, even though it was a holiday weekend. I also want to commend Wayne Aldrich for the presentation he gave at the last meeting on the underpass. I understand that that's now available in a podcast, and I know it answered a lot of questions for me, and it will be a difficult discussion to figure out how we make that happen. But I thought that was extremely well done and thorough, and I commend him for how clear that was. And I also want to give a shout out to the library director, who, as an overlooked item in the tax levy, the library fund levy, this levy has been reduced from last year. So despite the challenges that institution has, and despite the fact that they have, is it 1,000 a day? 1,000 a day in patrons, they continue to be a superior service to our community, and I think we have a lot in this community, and I just want to thank everybody for their efforts.
Mr. Day, I think you had a comment?
I do. This is probably ill-advised and stroking the pot, but I want to slightly clarify my answer to Mr. Preston's question about the property tax levy estimate. We do have to do an estimate 20 days before, or at least 20 days before our actual levy. The purpose of that estimate is to determine whether we have to do a truth in taxation notice. We're not required to follow that estimate. The statute actually specifically anticipates that your levy, your ultimate levy, may be different than the estimate that has been filed. But under the property tax code, there is that original estimate that is used for determining whether you've got the notice and hearing requirements under the truth in taxation law. But then you can later change that levy amount. And there's procedures if your amount's higher, if you exceed the 5% increase, then there's provisions there for holding a truth in taxation hearing after that. But so there is a statutory requirement to do the estimate, but it's not a legally binding estimate.
Mr. McCarthy?
Yeah. In light of all the,
He's winding up.
nah, I'll keep it brief. In light of everything, I'm going to add to my originally planned comment, but I'll get to that as well. To be clear, my intent was to get back a communication position and to fund that position with some degree of confidence. We don't take hiring staff lightly. We don't do it on a whim of maybe we can find some funding, maybe we can't. We take hiring people and paying them and their families very, very seriously, just like we did 2 years ago when we cut 25 positions. Some of those were filled and people lost their income and the ability to feed their families and pay for their homes. We take that very, very seriously. So funding a new position and going forward, I appreciate that staff takes that extraordinarily seriously and is not confident in doing that without stable funding. And that was my only intent for that amendment. Again, we're restoring a cut to funding, we're not adding. And despite the comment that we are not being open and transparent, this is a videotaped open meeting. There are members of the public here. We are not doing this behind closed doors. We took a vote, it's being recorded. This is very public and very transparent and very open. Lastly, what I intended to say on a lighter note, in talking with some friends over the Thanksgiving holiday weekend, they were venturing to travel to and Chicago and back using Amtrak. And although they bought most of their tickets going to Chicago early, one party joined them or wanted to join them and couldn't get a ticket because they were all sold out going to Chicago. And coming back, they hadn't purchased in advance, and got the next to last ticket coming back on a day when Amtrak had added an extra train coming just between Chicago and Normal. So basically, Amtrak between Chicago and Normal, with people coming from Chicago to Normal and Normal to Chicago, was sold out over the weekend. That is the success of what we're doing and what this train station is doing and done in our community. And I'm darn glad you guys 20 years ago decided to do it because it's working.
Thank you. Motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Hi, Paul.